Hi guys, how are you doing? Welcome back to Rule of Two Review. Today we weirdly have more Capcom news to discuss. So yeah, this really caught myself off guard, and it seems like it caught most people off guard as well, based on people's reactions all over the internet and Twitter and YouTube and all this crazy stuff. So it was announced today that Capcom will be releasing later this year, 2017, a port of both Resident Evil Revelations Part 1 and Revelations Part 2. I find this news to be incredibly fascinating for a variety of reasons, most notably because it comes right off of the heels of last week's information about Ultra Street Fighter 2 selling almost 500,000 copies, which shattered all expectations, including Capcom's, and how Capcom was feeling really great and bright and sunshiny about the Switch and Nintendo, and they discussed that they wanted to bring more games to the Switch soon, and I, of course, ran down a bunch of potential options of games that we might see in different capacities, and it was really crazy because it was like positive Capcom news about the Switch, and we've seen Capcom kind of play a very hands-off approach to Nintendo and the Switch, which seems odd because of their success with Nintendo consoles on the 3DS, with Monster Hunter, and other things in the past, and none of it made any sense. But hey, whatever, man. Now we've got some things happening. It's very interesting to see. There's some good, there's some questionable, and that's what I wanted to discuss today. Mostly because, not so much just because, oh, I just talked about Capcom and because it's the Switch and I love the Switch and I love talking about the Switch, but also I love Resident Evil. That's the thing that really brought me to making a video about this. I'm a diehard Resident Evil fan. It is one of my absolute favorite all-time gaming franchises, definitely one of my favorite non-Nintendo franchises, and I've played these games, and so I feel like I have a pretty unique perspective on both the Switch and Resident Evil, and these two Revelations games to kind of add into the mix here. So like I alluded to earlier, this news has been fairly controversial as far as I could see. There definitely seems to be a lot of people on different sides of the fence here, because some people feel offended by what's going on. Capcom obviously not having been supporting the Switch in the proper way, which I absolutely agree with. I mentioned that earlier in the video, and so some people feel like, okay, well now we're just getting more ports, and then other people feel like this is just totally fine and totally great news because it's just more games for the Switch, it's more third-party support, it's more support from Capcom, and all these different things. And you know, there's definitely, like I said, there's a lot of angles to come at this from, and I think that there's a case to be made all across the board for why this is really great news and really not so great news. You know, I'm kind of in the middle, but ultimately, I thought about this quite a bit. And I think that I'm ultimately coming down on this being mostly very positive news. This is a good thing to see. And here's the thing that turned the tides for me. I will admit, when I first read this news, I was like, oh man, okay. So you sell a bunch of Street Fighter copies, and now your first thing you want to do after talking so positively about the Switch and realizing you have money to make is to bring another port. Like, the Switch has already had so many ports. We even just had Rayman announced. We know Dragon Ball's coming. And then we're getting, you know, there's a bunch of Wii U ports, and now we're getting Resident Evil Revelations 1 and 2 all of a sudden. Like, what about Resident Evil 7 that just came out? What about any upcoming games? What's the deal with all of these? It definitely didn't sit right with me, and I was upset. Like, on surface level, I was like, well, this is kind of dumb. Like, what are you doing, Capcom? This isn't really what we want. We're done with ports. Give us new games. But the one piece of information that for me turned the tide and made it so I wasn't so outwardly angry and kind of am actually seeing this as a mostly positive thing is when I realized through reading through the news story that Capcom was already re-releasing the first Revelations for the Xbox One and PS4. That was news that was, I'm sure a lot of people knew, but even myself as a diehard Resident Evil fan, I had no clue. I didn't know that this was already a plan for Capcom, and when I saw that, I was like, oh, well, so they're already doing the lame last-gen port thing for the competitive machines, and now they're just doing the same thing even keel across the board and including the Switch. That actually is better news. I think that that's a little bit easier of easier to swallow of a business decision, in my opinion. When I read that news, I was like, okay, well, actually, they're just including the Switch in something that it was previously excluded from, and so I definitely see that as a win. Going over the actual details here, there's actually some pretty neat things going on. So what's actually happening is on August 29th, they will be releasing the first Revelations game with all of the DLC, for $20 on the PS4 and Xbox One. sometime after that, we do not have a date, but they have told us 2017, Resident Evil Revelations 1 and Revelations 2 will be getting a remaster and a release on the Nintendo Switch. It should be noted that as far as I could see with the research that I did, Revelations 2 is not supposed to be coming to any other console. That is apparently exclusive to just the Switch, and that's pretty neat. I guess the way it works is you can buy a physical or a digital copy across the board. If you buy the physical copy of Revelations 1 on the Switch, you buy that for $40 as opposed to $20. But you then also get a downloadable code to download a digital version of the entire Revelations 2. Or you could buy them both separately for $20 each on the eShop, which makes them totally on par with the pricing for the PS4 and Xbox One. And so there you go. That's what's going on. Very interesting stuff. So like I said, the fact that the Switch is actually getting more stuff, a complete whole new game that the other competitors aren't getting, and the sole fact that there are versions that this was already something Capcom was planning on doing made it kind of soften the blow for me. I was like, okay, well, I guess that's totally fine, you know? I mean, like I said, otherwise, in any other situation, the Switch would have been excluded. Now they're being included. There's another reason. There's a business reason I started to think of that kind of helped soften the blow a little bit as well, which is that, okay, obviously, well, not obviously, but in my opinion, if I was to just guess, I do feel like that this is a recently made decision by Capcom, that they weren't initially planning on bringing this game or these games to the Switch, but then the Street Fighter thing happened. They talked about bringing more games to the Switch, and they're probably scrambling to bring some stuff sooner than later, and that's probably part of the reason why the Switch version is also coming out after the fact. I mean, so many months, some time in the nebulous future after the PS4 and Xbox One versions. It's because they're working as hard as they can, as fast as they can probably, to make these games available. I mean, maybe this is something where, you know, they got dev kits way later than they did for other consoles, and it's just they started work on the port way later. That's entirely possible, but it doesn't feel that way. I mean, what are the odds this happens just days after the whole Capcom Ultra Street Fighter Switch games announcement? I feel like it's really tied to the fact that they were surprised how much of a market there is for games on the Switch. And again, that's really only a good thing. Again, yes, I do still see problems here though. It does suck that we're only getting ports. We're not getting any of these new games yet. I do still think some of that stuff may happen. You know, we have to give them time to do that. But it is unfortunate that this is the only thing they have to announce so far. It's like we have had a lot of Wii U ports. We've had some third-party ports. We've got more third-party ports to look forward to, and now we can just add this one to the mix. And it's like, man, the Switch is awesome. I love all of Nintendo's first-party stuff that's happened in a couple of other games, but really, there's a lot of ports in this first year. Maybe too many. Even though I'm very excited for Skyrim and Rayman, I will admit. But still, there's a lot of ports, man. And this is just kind of adding to that pile of problem. And it's a shame to see. The other argument, you know, if they were going to port a Resident Evil game, yeah, Resident Evil 7 would have been the better choice. It's a better game than the Revelations games, and it's a more recent game. It's more relevant. It came out in this calendar year. It would really showcase the visual possibilities on the Switch, which I do absolutely believe it could run a version of that game, and it would still look very good. So I think that there's some kind of lame things happening there. Why Capcom is choosing the Revelations thing, it's hard to say. My theory is that, honestly, it goes back to one of my first points, that they were already making a current-gen version of Revelations 1, and they're just kind of continuing that plan and just bringing that idea over to the Switch, and again, adding a whole brand new game. I really think that's part of it. The other reason is I feel like once they realized, oh man, there's an audience on the Switch, we can make money, we can sell our games, which to all of us is like, duh, how did you not know that? But apparently they didn't. So Ultra Street Fighter 2 taught them a very valuable lesson. Don't leave the Nintendo gamer out. We are here to buy good games if you release good games. And once they probably decided to change their model to saying, hey, we want to start bringing stuff to the Switch, well, they might as well bring the most immediate thing that they're going to be releasing. And as far as we can tell, the very next thing Capcom is bringing out is this version of Resident Evil Revelations. So if anything, this is technically the first opportunity they have to bring something, not including Monster Hunter Double Cross. That's a whole nother stupid mess, but I hope that gets changed soon. But in terms of other games, their first opportunity to bring something to the Switch actually is this Revelations game. So, you know, hey, if anything, they flipped the Switch really quick, and they're bringing their most immediate game over. Now, let's get to the last thing here, which is the actual games themselves. Again, Resident Evil fan, somebody who played both Revelations games. So the fact that these games are coming, the other reason I find this to be overall pretty okay news is because the first Revelations game is great. That is a very, very good game. And a good game on the Nintendo Switch is only a good thing. Yes, it's an older game. Yes, it's 4 years old right now, 2013, I want to say. And it was initially a 3DS game. But you know what? Who cares? It's a great game, and we've already seen how good the game can look when remastered for the home consoles. There was a 360, PS3, and a Wii U version, and it actually looked fantastic on the 3DS, by the way. That's the version I played, was the 3DS version. It's a great game. It's a great Resident Evil game. It does a lot to kind of pull you back into the original atmosphere and pace of the original Resident Evil games, but it was still using the third-person camera, and it does still do some of the co-op-y, action-y stuff that I haven't loved in the more recent games, but it handled it probably better than any modern Resident Evil game except for Resident Evil 4. So that's great to see that game coming based solely on the fact that it is a great, high-quality game. Revelations 2. Oh man, that one's a little bit tough for you guys because if I'm being really honest, I didn't really enjoy Revelations 2. I think the biggest crime that game committed was really just being boring. It was just a snooze fest, and it even brought back characters like Rebecca and Barry, which is incredible to do. So glad to see Barry back. But I played through the whole first downloadable chapter, and then, or maybe I finished, like, I can't even remember if I finished it or I played the first 2 chapters, which it was a 4-chapter original downloadable game. I either played half of it or all of it. I don't even remember, but I remember the gameplay, I remember a lot of the settings, and I remember a lot of the story. And I think it was admirable what they were trying to do, but it did not deliver. It did not live up to the first Revelations, and it definitely doesn't live up to the best Resident Evil games. So that one's trickier in the sense that I don't think it's a really great game, but it is cool that it's coming, and honestly, you know, I do take some issue with some of what Capcom is doing here, but overall, as a Resident Evil fan and a Switch fan, I think I can say I'm at least on board enough to pick this up, including Revelations 2. Maybe I give it another shot on the Switch, I don't know. But I haven't played the first Revelations since the 3DS release, and I would love to give it another shot, because again, that game is really good. And, you know, more people playing both of these games is a fine thing. I think they're going to find a nice audience on the Switch. I want Resident Evil on the Switch so badly. You heard me talk about it a few days ago with the Capcom thing. I think that the Resident Evil 2 remake would be a brilliant and smart move to bring that game over to the Switch whenever we finally get the curtain pulled back on that. I think there is a strong possibility that that does happen, and maybe this is just the first seeds to that. And maybe if this does well, then they bring Resident Evil 7, and then they bring the remake, and then they bring whatever else they're going to do. I mean, at this point, it's a little unfair, but when it comes to the Switch, some third parties want to see the goodwill earned back. And it's not really right, because some companies like Capcom really should be working to earn the goodwill of the gamer because they've made really crappy decisions. Even though I like Capcom sometimes, they also piss me off. And so it's this back and forth tennis match, you guys. And I don't know the best way to go about and win this tennis match. Does Capcom deserve to have a goodwill earned back, or does the gamers have the right to earn the goodwill back? I don't know. Everyone does, I guess. It just is what it is. It's kind of messy. So I'm just coming at this from the gamer perspective as like, hey, I love Resident Evil. Revelations 1 is a great game. I'd love to play it again on my Switch. I get to do that. So I'm just going to look at it from that perspective, and that's just me. But I do want to hear from you. What do you guys think about this? Is this really great news? Is this really frustrating news? Are you just kind of middle of the road? Maybe you'll get to play these games for the first time because you passed on them before. Maybe you don't even like Resident Evil. Talk about this below. Pretty crazy stuff. Some great, some not great, but I always like to talk about Resident Evil and Nintendo. So that's where we are, I think, with this today, guys. Tell me what you think below. Thanks, of course, as always, for tuning in. This is Rob over Rule 2 Review, and I will catch you next time on another video.